Today we're ranking every single dungeon in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. So Pokemon Mystery Dungeon is a fan favorite series that a lot of people love. And no one has actually ranked every single dungeon. So we'll be going over every single dungeon and giving it a 1 out of 1 to 10. Okay. So first one is Tiny Woods. This is the very first dungeon in the game. In the original games, you could not recruit Pokemon. There was no way you could recruit any Pokemon. Okay. This made it very complicated to get anything related to these 4 evolution lines. And the remakes, they actually made it you can recruit all 4 of the Pokemon and also added fainted Pokemon as well, which can also be easily obtained later in. Especially the hardest one being Sandshrew, as that one's from Magma Cavern. But again, you'll still have to have its friend area or friend camp in the newer games, I think it's called, as well. But for an introductory dungeon, it's pretty okay. I'll give it a 3 because you can't recruit Pokemon in the original game, and I always hated that. Okay, and the fact they made the Pokemon in this area so well, too. Like Execute, you have to go to Halloween Forest, and then you had to go to the 14th floor, and you would have a very small chance of actually finding it. I was never able to get Execute because of this stupid, strange decision they made in the very first Pokemon in the very first dungeon. Next is Thunderwave Cave. Thunderwave Cave is the second dungeon in the game, and there were several Pokemon you can get in this dungeon, including Rattata, Nidoran, Female, Poochyena, Voltorb, Elekid, Puzzle, and Minun. In the remake, they also have fainted Pokemon, which means it can get Slowpoke as early as the second dungeon. And Pokemon like Voltorb, Beldum, and Zigzagoon early, even though you can't recruit Pokemon until after you beat Mount Steel. You can also get Rhyhorn early as well, which is pretty good if you really want to get certain Pokemon early. The rest of all those Mount Steel Pokemon they can also get early. But in the original game, this is a good dungeon. Also, the soundtrack for the game, this is a much better dungeon. It is a much more memorable dungeon. You'll probably go back here multiple times to get like Voltorb and Puzzle and Minun and stuff and Poochyena. Because in the older game, you have to evolve Pokemon. You couldn't recruit, Pokemon. You had to evolve them. This was a pretty good one. 7 out of 10. Again, it's still an early dungeon, so I won't give it a very high score. Next is Mount Steel, and Mount Steel has some pretty good Pokemon in it. In the original game, you get Spearow, Boltoy, Zigzagoon, Aeron, Geodude, Tyrogue, Meditite, Beldum, and Pinsir. At the remakes, you can also get various Pokemon, mostly, Pokemon from the next dungeon early. You can also get Doduo early. It's not as great as getting Slowpoke early, as you can get Slowpoke before, so you don't have to recruit them in those water dungeons, which they made them harder. And also, this is the first dungeon to introduce the strong foe, which goes to give Pokemon Shiny. Also in the remake, you can get Mime Jr. in the dungeon as well. Overall, I always liked this one. I would give it an 8 out of 10. I also like the fact that in Raider 4, they changed the layout as well. And also the boss fight is pretty cool as well. You have to fight Skarmory. And yeah, it's a pretty good one. 8 out of 10. Not an S-tier dungeon, but yeah, amazing. Next is Sinister Woods. I always like this one too. I like the creepy music they play as well. And also, I actually managed to get a Silcoon and a Cascoon at one point. Yes, but they're one of the hardest Pokemon to recruit, so make sure you get an escape orb for that one. It also introduces the idea that you cannot recruit fully evolved Pokemon. Well, of course, a few exceptions. I think the reason why this is a thing most likely because of time constraints or something like that. Well, they probably wanted to make it where you could recruit all types of Pokemon. Because of time constraints, most likely, they didn't make that happen. But in the sequel, they did. But this introduces you to many new Pokemon as well. Well, including Pokemon like Strakoth, Hoothoot, and Cypher. And also you can get Sensret, but who likes Sensret? Also, this is the where you fight Team Minis for the first time. I think it's like the only time you actually fight them. But they are a pretty good villainous group for this game. They are really meanies. And in Gen 7 games, you can also get Bonsai in the dungeon as well. And also, all the Pokemon are recruitable. And also in the Gen 7 versions, you get the Strong Foe, and you can also get Pokemon from the next dungeon early, including Pokemon like Magby early as well. And also, with the creepy music and stuff, this is actually a pretty good dungeon. 8 out of 10. Next is Silent Chasm. This is probably one of my favorite dungeons. It's probably one of the most unique ones in this entire game. These are all the Pokemon available, which means you can get Yama, Riddle, Tediosa, Gloom, Houndour, Poliwag, Trapinch, and in the Gen 7 games, there's not really much difference in the Pokemon you find in the dungeon, but also you can get Larvitar in the dungeon in there, which means if you want Tyranitar early, well, you can just get them from this dungeon. You don't have to, and considering the fact they made a certain dungeon, you can get Larvitar line much harder. If you want the whole Tyranitar line, you can, and you have the Fire Starter. If you have, Charmander, you can actually get Larvitar as early as the 4th dungeon. And also, I just like this dungeon overall. It's a very unique one, and also there's a strong foe. This is in most dungeons. In the remakes as well, which means you can get a shiny Metagross in this dungeon if you want to. But overall, this dungeon, I think it's the first 10 out of 10 dungeon. Next is Mount Thunder. Another one of the most unique dungeons because I like the soundtrack, and also it's the first dungeon to introduce a second area. And also it's also the dungeon where you can recruit Zapdos, which of course is a legendary Pokemon. Overall, this is a really great dungeon. And also it's a pretty good theme. You can fight it's an electric type themed dungeon. And the remakes there wasn't really much in interesting Pokemon. You can get Smoochum, but I don't think anyone likes Smoochum or Jinx. But you can get them early if you really want to. But you can also get Hoppip early as well. So overall, Mount Thunder is actually a pretty good dungeon. I would also give it a 10 out of 10. It's one of the best dungeons in the entire game. So next is Great Canyon. So Great Canyon, again, another one of my favorite dungeons from this game. Great Canyon, it's the best dungeon for simply the soundtrack. It's very unique, and the soundtrack is never seen anywhere else in the game. And also in the remix, you can get Bagon early, but again, Bagon's found in the next dungeon. It's a 10 out of 10. This has the best soundtrack, and they even make you revisit it again where you have to get to if you want the legendary beasts. Next is Rapids Cave. Again, this is one of the more underwhelming dungeons. After 3 amazing dungeons, we get Rapids Cave. Rapids Cave is one of the most boring dungeons. You can get Bagon in this dungeon and Nincada, but for some reason in the remake you can't get Nincada for some strange reason. Yeah, that's very strange, but also you can get Mallow, which is, it's pretty good because guess what? You won't have to go through you won't have to go through a certain dungeon to get Mallow, which is almost impossible. But yeah, overall this dungeon is pretty underwhelming. I would give it a 5 out of 10. Still better than, at least you can recruit Pokemon in this. Next is Mount Blaze. Mount Blaze is a pretty good dungeon. Not as great as Mount Thunder, but Mount Blaze is good. It is a fire type dungeon, and most Pokemon you find out are fire types as well. And the remake, it seems they added more Pokemon too, but they just added the Mount Blaze Peak Pokemon because they got rid of that whole area. I was kind of underwhelmed. They removed the whole middle dungeon thing they had, and also in this dungeon you can get certain Pokemon early like Corvus. But other than that, this is a pretty good dungeon. I'll give it an 8 out of 10. Next is Frosty Forest. To get another good dungeon as well. This is the dungeon you can get Articuno. Oh yeah, in Mount Blaze you can get Moltres, which means by default I'm just gonna have to give this a high score because you can get legendary Pokemon on this one. And it's also very, very, challenging dungeon for the original game, especially because Articuno is pretty tough to beat with, the power with the snow attacks. And also, there's no Zenders in this game, so that's gonna use them as Vodom as it or something like that. But also in this way, you can get Spinder early as a strong foe, but you can also get several Mount Freeze Pokemon. But After you beat the game, you'll be able to have access to Mount Freeze. But you can also get Budew, which is a rare Pokemon as well. Overall, this is a pretty good dungeon. I think it's better than Mount Blaze, so 9 out of 10. Next is Mount Freeze. Again, one of the better dungeons in the game. I always liked Mount Freeze. You know, the whole we have to climb the mountain to get to, you know, we have to get to, Ninetales. It's always a very climatic end to the fugitive arc in the game, which is the only real arc you have in the game. Because in the second game, you have two arcs you have to go, 2 or 3 arcs you have to go through. But in this one, you only have one. And this is a pretty good dungeon. You get several cool Pokemon, but the storyline arc this is a conclusive arc. And I like this one because of that. So this dungeon gets a 10 out of 10. Next is Magma Cavern. This is where you get Groudon. And yeah, this is one of the end game dungeons. And it's a very tough and intimidating dungeon. When I was a kid, I actually had struggles with the last 2 dungeons of this game. Actually, I did skip 1 dungeon, but I think we'll get to it later. As well, that's another story dungeon we skipped. It's the forced one of the forced ones. But Magma Cavern's still good. It's pretty tough and pretty difficult as well. You can get Grimer and Onix at the end of the dungeon. And also, you can get Groudon, which, again, it's a very tough recruit. But you cannot get it until after you beat the game. In Generation 7, you can get more Pokemon. And also, it introduces the Mystery House, which means you can get Pokemon like Metagross. But also, in this game, Groudon's 100% recruit. Which means, yes, you can get a 100% recruit on Groudon. Which is pretty cool. You can get a 100% recruit on a certain Pokemon. So overall, it's a pretty good dungeon, all things considered. Next is Magma Cavern gets a 10 out of 10. Very obvious. Next is Sky Tower. Instant 10 out of 10. The final dungeon in the game has to be good. Of course it is. It's tough, it's difficult, it's challenging. It has 2 bosses. On the 24th floor, there's a Monster House boss, and of course, there's Rayquaza. Of course, because of this is just a masterpiece of a dungeon. It's very difficult, very hard. And when I was a kid, I used to think there was a time limit for this dungeon. Well, if you didn't enter it in a certain amount of time, if you didn't be in a certain amount of days, your game will just end. Fortunately, that's not how it works because, yeah. Which is kind of quite funny because I messed around at the end of Pokemon, Explorers of Sky, Time of Darkness, and there was no timer in that. So there was really no timer to beat Sky Tower. I was really that dumb as a kid. But yeah. Overall, this is a very good end dungeon and a very good challenging dungeon. So that means, yes, you can actually I did realize you can actually take your time to prepare Reviver Seeds, do quests to get Reviver Seeds, escape orbs and stuff, in case you get into a tough situation. Next is Uproar Forest. This is another one of the more underwhelming dungeons, considering how vast it is. It does have a very unique selection of Pokemon, but it's just not my favorite dungeon. Overall, I'll just give it a 6 out of 10. You have to come back to it multiple times, which makes this dungeon pretty repetitive as well. Also, it's the only area you can get certain Pokemon like Roselia and Aipom and Mankey as well. And also, this has several good Phaeton Pokemon, and also you can get the Mystery House starts here too. So yeah. Now let's get to the post-game dungeons. First one is Halloween Forest. This dungeon I always didn't like. Why? Because of the bullshit this dungeon has. So, what do you mean by bullshit? This is the only dungeon we can recruit Pidgey and Execute, and also Snorlax as well. Well, this is a very hard recruit, and they made Execute not only a 6% chance to recruit, so Execute only has a less than 1% chance of appearing on the 14th floor. They even beat them as, let's make him appear on floors 10 to 14, give people multiple chances to counter Execute, but they only give you 1 chance to recruit this Pokemon. Thankfully, in the dungeon, they fixed the whole Execute problem, and they made Execute easier to get in the DX version, which I think is much needed. This is probably one of my least favorite dungeons in the game, so I'll give this a 2 out of 10 because of the whole Execute thing. But yeah. Next is Stormy Sea, the first real post-game dungeon that you have to go to. Stormy Sea is a very intimidating dungeon. You need the ATEM dive, which means you have to get, which you can get by risk cast, but you can also get it through a certain cave, but also most likely you should teach it. But in this game, but in the remake, you don't need dive anymore. You know. Yeah, and yeah, the Kyogre battle is pretty difficult, and I think I did recruit Kyogre in this game. I think I recruited all three of the major bosses, Groudon, Rayquaza, and Kyogre. But also this is the first Sea dungeon, and they're not my favorite dungeons, but at least this one you get Kyogre. Within the original, we get a 50% chance of recruiting it, and of course in the remake. Kind of like the Dale the Explorers games, once you beat the boss legendary, it will 100% join your team every single time. Kind of like how you beat Dialga in Pokemon Explorers. So you get Dialga to join your team 100% of the time as well. So yeah, this is overall a good dungeon. I'll give it a 9 out of 10. It's a pretty good one. Next is Silver Trench. This is one of the most difficult dungeons in the game. Even in the remake, they still made it a 99.4 dungeon. I actually did not get to this area because of how much harder the remake is, but this is a very hard and difficult dungeon. It's 994s, and it's very difficult. And also, the certain Pokemon can only get in the lower 4s. I think it's the same thing with the remake as well, which means there's only certain Pokemon you can get in the lower 4s. And also in this dungeon, you can get the Gen 1 starters as fainted Pokemon. And also the Pokemon level was like 60 in the remake. Yes, level 60. As well, and there's also the whole Mystery House thing. But yeah, overall, this is a good and challenging dungeon. I'll give it a 9 out of 10. It's a pretty good, challenging dungeon. And you also can get Lugia too, which means if you want to recruit Lugia, you have to come back. You would have to come back again to get Lugia to join you. So yeah. And they also made a Lugia where Lugia is 100% chance recruitable, which is pretty nice. Next is Media Cave. Yeah, I hate this one. So basically, if you do not know this one, and this one, you can only bring one Pokemon, and of course in the remake, you can bring 3, which is good for that, but basically this is one of the worst dungeons in the entire game. This is basically where you recruit Deoxys, and basically you have to defeat the invisible Deoxys here, and here. Yeah, and basically you have to defeat the fake Deoxys here. I don't know how it is in the remake, but you have to defeat the fake. This is like one of the worst dungeons in the entire game. Yes, if you want Deoxys, you have to go to this dungeon here, but it's just very, very just difficult as well. And the remake, I think you just have to fight a bunch of bosses. As well. And also, you could seek to get the Mirage Deoxys to join your party. But I always hate this dungeon because because there's only one Mirage Deoxys per level. And yeah, I'll give this dungeon a 1 out of 10. I hate this dungeon. I never got Deoxys because of how dumb and ridiculous this dungeon is. Because I always run out of hunger. Yeah, I hate this one. Next is Fiery Field. This is the first of the 3 field dungeons. This is a fire type dungeon, and of course you can get Entei after you beat it. So if you want Entei, this is the area where you have to get it. Also, there's several fainted Pokemon you get, including Togepi, which means you want to go to those stupid level 1 dungeons this time as well. But yeah, this is a pretty meh dungeon. It's not really anything too special. You can get Entei, but yeah. This is a 7 out of 10 to me because you can get Entei. Next is Lightning Field. I like this one much more. I always like the background in the original as well. It's also pretty difficult if you do not level up your Pokemon so high. This does get more challenging as well. And yeah, I like this one. And also in the original, Raikou is a 0.1% chance to recruit. You have to go into this multiple times as well. Because I like the theming of, because I like the background of the game. I like the fact that it's like a giant, lightning field. I like this one. This one's a 7 out of 10. Next is my favorite of them all. Okay, I'll give Fireway Field a 6 out of 10. This is my favorite one, Northwind Field. I like it changes at the end. And also, you can get Crocodile and Wartortle in this one for some reason. Not Marshtomp. Sorry, Marshtomp fans. You don't get that. You don't appear in this dungeon. But also, you can get several unique Pokemon in this dungeon as well. And also, this is the only dungeon you get Delibird as well. And also, you can get Suicune. And I just like this one the most. It's an 8 out of 10 for me. So, next is Mile Far Away. Yeah, this is one. It is hard. This one is pretty hard, but I've never been a big fan of this one. So this is like the dungeon you can get Castform in. And only get Ho-Oh, but again, Ho-Oh is a guaranteed recruit. And it isn't that hard to get Ho-Oh. You just have to bring enough apples and max elixirs to get through the dungeon. And you probably may even be at over 100 at this point as well. Yeah. Yeah, also this one, and also in the remake, they made the area way harder as well. But yeah, this one is a 5 out of 10. I just think the Mount Far Away is a underwhelming dungeon. Next is Western Cave. So, in the original dungeon, this one would be a 10 out of 10, no question. There's so many unique Pokemon, and it's a very long and difficult dungeon. There's also no apples, so it won't be a, But for some reason, in the generation and the remake, they made it Solar Cave 2.0. This is probably the most disappointing thing in the history of things. Yeah. Why did they make it Solar Cave 2.0? Who asked for that? Probably nobody. And for that, we're gonna bring this down, this masterpiece of the dungeon in the original, down to an 8 out of 10. The original version, but we're going about the original version, it'll still be a 10 out of 10. This is easily one of the best dungeons in the entire series. But in the DX version will get a 5 out of 10. We're just being generous here. Next is Northern Reigns. Again, this is a dungeon that I do not really like too much either. This is the dungeon where you can get where you fight Latios, but after you beat Latios, there's really no reason to come back here. So fight for Spinarak and Hoothoot can be found in earlier dungeons, unless you want to get easy evolve Pokemon. But yeah, overall, there was really not much reason to come back here. There's not really many Pokemon you can get, so I'll give this a 2 out of 10. Next is Pitfall Valley. This is a much better dungeon as well. Yeah, but even then, it's still like the selection of Pokemon. Our Pokemon can only get in other areas, with the exception of Hoppip. Hoppip was like the only real unique Pokemon you can get here. All of the other Pokemon you can get here are in other dungeons as well. So yeah, this is another one, 4 out of 10. Next is Buried Relic, another 10 out of 10. You can get Mew in this dungeon, even though it's very rare. As well, you can also get all 3 of the Reggies as well. And the remake, they made the Reggies 100% recruitable. Yeah. It's not a challenge to get, the Reggies. Also, Mew, they only made it where you can get Mew on certain 4s as well. So 40, 60, 70, 90, and 98 as well. Yeah. And yeah, basically this dungeon, they changed it in the remake. But even then, it's a pretty good dungeon. You can get Mew, even though it's very hard to get. And also you can get the Reggies as well. And also, there's just a lot of unique Pokemon you can get here. This is a 10 out of 10 dungeon. It's a very unique dungeon as well. Here. Next is Risk Cave. So this is a dungeon you can get Jirachi in, and I never was able to really beat it because I always sucked at these level 1 dungeons. And also you have Pokemon like Bellsprout, Magnemite, Sunkern, Cleffa, and stuff in it, which in this version, in the original game, that was the only way you can get them. Which means if you wanted these certain Pokemon, you had to go to this certain dungeon. But other than that, you can also get Jirachi once you get to the end of the dungeon, which is a 99-401 dungeon as well. Maybe if I used cheats, I did get to Jirachi. But yeah, And the Generation 7 games, yeah. I think the Generation 7 games, they actually got rid of the whole. They got it to level 5. Yeah, which is pretty funny. And if we want to start out like level 8 as well. Overall, this is a okay dungeon. It's a 7 out of 10 in my book. Next is Murky Cave. This is another one of my least favorite dungeons. I always didn't really like this dungeon all too much. The storyline of this dungeon, I like it. You also get a free Pokemon out of being this dungeon, with the whole Gengar and God of War storyline being wrapped up as well. But it's just one of the most weirdest dungeons. Like it's just my least favorite as well. Mostly ghost and poison types. Mostly these Pokemon you can always find in other dungeons except for Crobat. But other than that, it's not my favorite one as well. Yeah, and Generation 7 apparently you get different types of Pokemon, which again they finally spiced it up a little bit. Include Pokemon like Squirtle and Typhlosion. And they actually all made it practically dusty. They made it slightly unique. But either way, this is not, one of my favorite dungeons. This is a 4 out of 10 for me. Next is Desert Region. It's just a desert area. And basically, you just get this after I gain a certain friend area. And also you get sandstorms. And basically, this is one of the best dungeons. This is a dungeon you can get keys and stuff in. So yeah, this is a pretty good dungeon. I'll give it a 6 out of 10, a 7 out of 10. It's a pretty good one. Next is Southern Cavern. This is a pretty good and challenging dungeon if you want to go into it. There's many Pokemon you can find you can find nowhere else as well. And overall, this is a pretty good and challenging dungeon. Overall, I'll give it an 8 out of 10. Next is Wyvern Hill, which is another one that's pretty good and challenging as well. Also, some very unique Pokemon you can get here, like Dratini, you can get here, and you can get Artists for some strange reason. It's mostly a dragon type dungeon, and also can get Totodile here as well. So yeah, and also you can get certain items in this, including HM Fly, which if you want to return to Sky Tower, overall it's an 8 out of 10. Next is Solar Cave. This dungeon is kind of tedious. There was a lot of unique Pokemon in it, but I just didn't like the fact that if you wanted certain items, you had to come here specifically if you want to dive and waterfall and surf as well. And also you can get moonstones and sunstones can be found here. And ring cables can be found here as well. And also now you can get the Friend Bow in the remake as well. Overall, this dungeon is 5 out of 10. I just don't like the tedious of having to come back here every single time they don't give you a Pokemon a certain move as well. I hate HMs. Dark Knight Relic again, in the remake they changed it a little bit. Also for some reason said there's a negative 25% recruit even with a Friend Bow. Yeah, I don't know what's up with that, but overall this dungeon is pretty weird. Overall, not really a big fan of this one. 4 out of 10. There's something that's always made me feel creeped out, specifically this one. But yeah, I'm not really a big fan of it. Next is Grand Sea. Yeah, this is a dungeon I rarely went to in the game. And this is a dungeon you can get Man Team, and that's it. That's literally the only Pokemon. I can only spawn 142 at the very end, which means you can just breeze through the dungeon. Or you can find Dragonite in this dungeon for some strange reason. But other than that, there is not really much worth going to. In the remake, you can get certain Pokemon that are pretty well. But other than that, this is a dungeon. It's 4 out of 10. Next is Waterfall Pond again. This is basically a dungeon if you want to get like Magikarp and Feebas, which are pretty rare Pokemon. But other than that, you get certain like Pokemon like Barboats here, and certain Pokemon that are found nowhere else in this game as well. Overall, overall, I give Wildfire Font a 6 out of 10. Oh, this is the worst dungeon in the game. Unknown Relic, 1 out of 10. I hate Unknown. I hate the whole Pokemon of Unknown. Unknown is one of the worst Pokemon ever. And overall, this is the score I'll give to Unknown Relic. Next is Joyous Tower. Basically, in the original game, there's so many Pokemon that are only found in Joyous Tower. I just hated that whole idea of it. It's also a pretty difficult dungeon. And also, there's really nothing at the end of it in the original game. I know in the remake there probably is as well, you know, the 99.4. But in the original game, there's really nothing at the end. I'll give this a 5 out of 10. Yes, there are so many Pokemon that are found nowhere else, but this dungeon is kind of pretty tedious and there's no real reward at the end. Next is Far Off Sea, 75-4 dungeon, and it's just... There's nothing really found here that's really special either. You can find Wayward at the end, but other than that, 3 out of 10. This is one of the more forgettable dungeons. You don't ever go to it. Next is Purity Forest. So Purity Forest is the hardest dungeon in the entire game. It can also get Celebi at the very end, which when I beat this dungeon, I was like shocked. Like, oh my god, he got Celebi. And Celebi joins you immediately. Like, there's no boss battle. Celebi just joins you. And it's like a pretty great reward for being this extremely hard and challenging dungeon. I'll give this dungeon an 8 out of 10. Next is Oddity Cave. And the original is just like a bunch of Pokemon that just appear that you have met through your adventure. Nothing really special, 3 out of 10. But in the remake, it is actually pretty good. A good sort of Pokemon early. So I think because of that, I'll bump it up to a 5 out of 10. Next is Remains Island. It's just a redo of a certain other dungeon. And in the remake, they actually made it more interesting. Other than that, this dungeon's a 4 out of 10. Next is Marvelous Sea again. And the remake, they changed everything, but other than that, this is a pretty meh dungeon. It's just more, it's another ocean dungeon. And there's nothing really special here, so 3 out of 10. Same thing with Fantasy Strait. I don't know what's with this game and this all these ocean dungeons. I get the oceans make up a lot of the planet. But again, in the remake, they did change the spawn Pokemon in this one. And also, the dungeon is getting harder, and yeah, for some strange reason. But overall, not a very interesting dungeon. And then the last one, I think, is Illusionary Grotto, which is a special dungeon here. And basically, if you have no Reviver Seeds, Tiny Reviver Seeds, or Revival Orbs, as all. So, other than that, there is really... I'll give this a 10 out of 10 because the only way you get this is by losing all of your Reviver Seeds and stuff here. And yeah, the Pokemon also vary by dungeon. Basically, this is basically a dungeon to help you, so I'll give it a 6 out of 10. And that's about thinking every single mystery dungeon. Goodbye.